Welcome to Horror Echo. Hello everyone. I'm here to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. But before you do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time it is where you're watching. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let me take you on a journey into the unknown. Whispered Story, The Haunting of Hollow Creek. It was a cold, damp evening, one of those nights when the fog rolls in like a thick, suffocating blanket, covering the world in a veil of mystery. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. As I walked down the narrow, overgrown path leading into the woods near Hollow Creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. You see, Hollow Creek is not your average small town. There's an eerie history here, one that the locals whisper about but never speak of openly. People who visit often leave, but never return. Those who stay too long, well, they change. It's hard to explain, but there's something about this place. Something wrong. Something haunted. I came to Hollow Creek years ago, a curious wanderer looking for adventure, unaware of the dark forces that lurked in its shadow. They say it all started when the old mill by the creek was abandoned. The mill had stood for centuries, long before the town was founded. But one stormy night, something happened. The mill caught fire, and when the flames were finally put out, there was no trace of the mill's owner, just his eerie, unsettling presence still lingering in the air. People who lived in the town back then told stories of strange noises coming from the mill. People reported hearing footsteps on the creaky floorboards late at night, but no one could find the source. Eventually, the mill was forgotten, its ruins left to rot and decay. The locals say the fire didn't consume everything, that something or someone was left behind. That's when the strange happenings began. I wasn't sure whether to believe in these stories. After all, every town has its legends, and I'm not the superstitious type. But there was one thing that was impossible to ignore, the whispers. They started when I first set foot in Hollow Creek. Soft at first, barely audible, whispers that seemed to float just at the edge of hearing, like a breath on the back of your neck. Sometimes, I would be walking through the woods or sitting by the creek, and I would hear my name. My full name, whispered in a voice that wasn't mine. I thought it was the wind, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the whispers started to feel intentional. I would hear them more clearly now. They weren't just my name. They were messages. A warning. Stay away from the creek. Don't go near the mill. And then, one evening, the whispers became more insistent. It was just before dusk, and the fog had begun to roll in. I had made the decision to visit the old mill, despite the stories. I had to know the truth. As I approached the ruins, I felt a chill, one that wasn't from the cold air. It was something deeper, something ancient. The whispers in my ear grew louder, more frantic, urging me to turn back. Leave. It's too late, the voice begged. But I didn't listen. I stepped inside the crumbling stone walls of the mill. The air inside was thick with dust, the beams overhead groaning with the weight of years of neglect. It was darker in there than I expected, even with the faint light from the setting sun trying to pierce through the broken windows. As I ventured deeper into the heart of the mill, something caught my eye. At the center of the room stood a well. Old, cracked, and covered in moss. It was deep, far deeper than any well I had ever seen, and I could hear water sloshing faintly far below. I stepped closer to it, my curiosity overwhelming my better judgment. The moment I leaned over the edge, a hand shot up from the depths. I jumped back in shock, heart racing, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Just the well, still and silent. Did you hear that? I whispered to myself, trembling. The whispers responded, softer now, almost like a sigh in the air. You shouldn't have come. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I was sure the anxiety was getting to me, but the dread in the air was undeniable. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from above me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. I looked up, expecting to see someone standing on the upper level, but the place was abandoned. I called out, my voice trembling. Hello? Is anyone there? No response. Just the sound of the creak outside and the unsettling feeling that I was not alone. I slowly made my way back to the door, but just as I reached the threshold, I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder now, filling my head, drowning out every thought. It's too late to leave, they hissed, voices overlapping. It's too late for you. You're already part of it. I stumbled backwards, panic rising in my chest. My legs felt weak, my head spinning. I had to get out of there. As I turned to run, I heard a voice. It wasn't from the whispers, it was from somewhere deeper in the mill. Someone was calling my name. A voice I hadn't heard in years. And then, the floor beneath me cracked, and I fell. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of distant laughter. The laughter that echoed through the mill, a cruel, mocking laugh that was not human. When I woke up, I was outside the mill. How I got there, I don't know. The sun was gone, and the fog was thicker than before. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. My mind was foggy, like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up. The whispers were still there, following me, always behind me. You can never leave, they whispered. And that's when I realized I was never meant to leave. The fog was thicker now, swirling around me like a living thing, as though it had come to claim me. I staggered through the woods, each step feeling like I was walking in a dream. The air was oppressively silent, the only sound the whispering that followed me, constant, like a shadow I couldn't escape. I tried to make my way back to the town, but the path seemed longer, as though the woods themselves were shifting, rearranging to prevent me from leaving. The trees were twisted, gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched, not by anything human, but something older. Something that had seen countless souls come and go, yet always remained. The whispers were clearer now, as if they were no longer just in my head, but emanating from the very trees, the earth beneath my feet. Turn back, turn back. It was almost a chant now, like a warning, but one that could not be ignored. The dread that had been building inside me was now a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I could feel my heart racing, the fear gnawing at me. I tried to shake it off. It was just fear, right? Just the mind playing tricks. But then, I heard it. A voice. A deep, rumbling voice that wasn't part of the whispers. It was a voice I had heard before, in my dreams, in my nightmares. The voice of the mill's owner. You can't leave, it said. so close that I could almost feel its breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, expecting to see something, a figure, a shadow, anything. But there was nothing. Only the fog, thick and suffocating. The world felt distorted, as though I were trapped in some otherworldly place where time and space had no meaning. Then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just a voice. It was a command. Come closer. I hesitated, but the pull was overwhelming. The whispers, the voice, it all seemed to lead me toward something. Something at the heart of the woods. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady, my head spinning. The fog grew thicker until it felt like I was walking through a wall of mist. And then, through the fog, I saw it. A figure. A man, tall and thin, standing motionless among the trees. His face was obscured, but there was something about him that felt wrong. He stood in the clearing, like a sentinel, watching me. I knew instinctively that he wasn't human. Not anymore. He raised one hand, motioning for me to come closer. And against every instinct in my body, I stepped toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, frantic, urging me to stop, to turn around. But I couldn't. It was as if my feet were no longer my own, as if some invisible force was pulling me toward the figure. As I drew closer, the fog seemed to part around him, revealing more of his silhouette. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his clothes were tattered, as though they had been worn for centuries. The air around him was colder, the temperature dropping with each step I took. When I was just a few feet away, the figure spoke again, but his voice wasn't the one I had heard before. This voice was older, deeper, filled with an unnatural resonance that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome to your new home," he whispered. In an instant, the ground beneath me trembled, and I fell to my knees, my vision blurring. The fog twisted, swirling around me like a storm. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the man's face, or what should have been his face. His eyes were wide, black as pitch, with no pupils, just endless voids. His mouth stretched into an eerie smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. And then, nothing. When I awoke, I was back at the mill. But this wasn't the same mill. This was something else, something darker, more twisted. The walls were covered in what looked like dried blood, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, like they were all around me, pressing in from every direction. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if I were paralyzed, trapped in some kind of nightmare from which I couldn't escape. I struggled, my heart racing in terror, but the more I fought, the stronger the presence became. It was suffocating. "Don't fight it," the voice of the man echoed around me. "You're already a part of this place. You always were." Suddenly, I felt it, a hand, cold and clammy, wrapping around my wrist. I gasped and looked down, but there was no hand. Only the sensation of being held, trapped in a vice grip that I couldn't break free from. The floor creaked beneath me, and I looked up to see the figure again, standing just a few feet away. His black eyes locked onto mine, and the smile spread wider, impossibly wider, as though his face was stretching to fit something too large to contain. "You'll stay with us now," he whispered. "Forever." The last thing I remember was hearing the sound of footsteps, countless footsteps, coming closer. And then, silence. I woke up in a cold sweat, my body shaking uncontrollably. The surroundings had changed again. I was no longer inside the mill, but lying on the damp earth, surrounded by trees. Their twisted branches stretched into the dark sky like fingers, clawing at the heavens. The fog had lifted, but the air was still thick with an unnatural chill. The ground beneath me felt soft, as though I had fallen into some kind of grave, an ancient resting place for the forgotten. The whispers had stopped, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I tried to stand, but my legs were weak, my body stiff, as if I had been asleep for years. My mind was foggy, filled with fragments of the nightmare I had just experienced. The man with the black eyes, his grin stretching impossibly wide, his words echoing in my mind. "You'll stay with us now. Forever." I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air was still and heavy, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I slowly turned around, half expecting to see that figure again, the one that had haunted me in the mill. But there was nothing. Just trees. I began to walk, slowly at first, unsure of where I was going. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had happened, trying to make sense of everything. But nothing made sense. There was no way to explain the horrors I had seen, the things I had heard. As I stumbled through the forest, I noticed something strange. The trees. They weren't just trees. Their bark was cracked, as though they had been scarred by something far worse than time. Some of the trees had faces, distorted, twisted faces etched into the bark. Faces that seemed to watch me as I passed, their eyes following my every move. A chill ran down my spine. I knew then that I had not left the mill behind. I had fallen into something worse. This was the heart of Hollow Creek, the place where the land itself was cursed, where the spirits of the forgotten were trapped, unable to rest. And then I heard it. A faint whisper, so soft that I could barely catch it, but it was there. And it was coming from the trees. Turn back. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was so faint, like a breath in the wind. But I had heard it. I wasn't imagining things. I spun around, my eyes searching the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the twisted trees, their faces watching, waiting. The whispering continued, now louder, more frantic. Turn back. Don't go further. But I couldn't turn back. I was already too deep. The whispers were like a song, a melody that I couldn't resist. They called to me, pulling me forward, deeper into the woods. I stumbled through the trees, my breath shallow, my heart racing. The further I went, the more the woods seemed to close in around me. The path became narrower, the trees pressing closer together, their gnarled branches intertwining above me, blocking out the moonlight. It felt like I was being drawn into a maze, a labyrinth with no way out. And then I saw it. In the distance, just beyond the reach of the fog, there was a light. A dim, flickering light, like the glow of a lantern. It seemed to beckon me, calling me to it. I knew I should turn away. I knew it was a trap, but something deep within me urged me forward. I walked toward the light, my feet moving on their own, as if I were no longer in control of my own body. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with their frantic cries. Don't go. Don't go to the light. But it was too late. I reached the clearing, and there it was, the source of the light. It was a small, withered shack standing alone in the middle of the forest. The windows were cracked and the door hung loosely on its hinges. The light came from an old lantern sitting on a rickety wooden table inside. I stepped closer, my breath catching in my throat. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and damp earth filled my nostrils. The lantern's flickering flame cast eerie shadows on the walls. And in the corner of the room, there was a mirror. At first, I didn't notice it. My eyes were drawn to the lantern, to the strange warmth that radiated from it. But then, I turned my head, and I saw the mirror. It was old, the glass clouded with age. But I could see something, or rather, someone reflected in it. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. The reflection in the mirror was not my own. It was a man, tall, thin, with black eyes and a cruel smile. The same man I had seen in the woods, in the mill, in my dreams. He stood behind me in the reflection, his eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have come," the reflection whispered, its voice low and menacing. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was empty. The air in the shack grew heavier, thicker. My chest tightened, and the whispers were everywhere now, filling my ears, my mind, my very soul. They were no longer just voices. They were hands pressing against my skin, pulling me into the darkness. And then I heard it again, that deep, rumbling voice from the man in the forest. "You belong to us now." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body froze, paralyzed by fear. The door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, frantic now, filling the room, surrounding me, choking me. The lantern's flame flickered violently, casting shadows that danced and twisted as though the very walls were alive. The figure in the mirror smiled, its grin stretching impossibly wide. "You will never leave Hollow Creek," it whispered. And that was when I understood. The land was alive. The town was alive. And once you entered, there was no escaping. The curse of Hollow Creek had claimed me. Forever. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me, suffocating me. The shack felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in. The whispers grew louder, their words incomprehensible, but the tone, urgent, desperate, was unmistakable. It was as if they were trying to warn me, or perhaps condemn me. "You cannot run," the man's voice echoed in my head again. "You cannot escape us." I turned toward the door, my hands shaking, trying to pull the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door felt like it was fused to the frame, as though it had been sealed shut by some unnatural force. Panic surged through me, and I tried again, harder this time, my muscles aching with the effort, but still, the door wouldn't move. "Please," I whispered to the room. "Please, let me out." But the only response was the soft, hollow laughter that echoed through the shack, a cruel sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air. I turned toward the mirror again, the only thing that seemed familiar in the chaos around me. The man was still there, his reflection staring back at me, a twisted smile stretching wider and wider, his black eyes empty and hollow, sucking in everything around him. "You think you can leave?" the reflection mocked, its voice colder than the dead of winter. "There is no escape from Hollow Creek. Once you've come here, you belong to it. You belong to us." I felt my body tremble, my knees buckling beneath me. The room spun as though the very foundation of the shack was shifting. I stumbled backward, desperate to find some way out, some way to break free from the nightmare that had consumed me. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the shack itself was alive, alive with the curse of the land, the curse that had taken so many before me. The whispering grew louder now, overwhelming, until it felt like the voices were inside my head, filling every corner of my mind. It was as if the shack was alive, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every breath I took. It's too late. The voice was no longer just a reflection in the mirror. It came from everywhere, beneath my feet, in the walls, in the very air I breathed. I looked down, and the floorboards beneath me began to creak and groan, as if something was shifting beneath the wood. The ground trembled, and I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, rumbling growl, like an animal, but not one I had ever heard before. It was close. So close. I backed away, my legs weak with fear, my mind racing for some kind of explanation, some way to make sense of the terror that was unfolding around me. But nothing made sense. Nothing could explain the dark, evil force that gripped Hollow Creek. The growl grew louder, more intense, until I felt the very ground beneath me shake with the force of it. And then, from the corner of the room, I saw something moving. Something large. Something alive. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, my eyes fixed on the shadow moving toward me. It was a figure, but not a human one. Its body was distorted, long and thin, with limbs that seemed too long, too unnatural. Its face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning, searing into my very soul. The growl came again, closer now, and I could see it, a twisted, misshapen creature, its skin dark and leathery, stretching taut over its palms. Its mouth was open, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, gleaming in the dim light. The whispers stopped for a moment, as though the creature was commanding silence. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. My legs were paralyzed, my breath shallow and ragged. And then the creature spoke, its voice low and guttural, like the sound of rocks grinding together. You should not have come. The words sent a wave of pure terror crashing through me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The creature took another step toward me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, and I knew then that it was not a being of this world. It was something ancient, something beyond human understanding. I wanted to scream, to beg for mercy, but no words came. The creature was too close now, its form looming over me, casting a dark shadow that seemed to swallow the light around it. It reached out a long, twisted arm, and I could feel its cold, bony fingers brushing against my skin. A cold so deep, so unnatural, it felt like it was sucking the warmth from my very soul. There is no escape, the creature whispered, its voice like 1,000 souls crying out in torment. Suddenly, the world around me began to shift again. The walls of the shack twisted, the floor cracking beneath me. The creature let out a low, bone-chilling laugh as the room seemed to stretch and distort, as though it was pulling apart. In the distance, I heard a faint sound, a cry, a scream. It sounded like someone was calling my name. The voice was familiar, but it was distant, as though it was coming from far away. My head spun, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, faintly illuminated by the dying light of the lantern. But when I blinked, the figure was gone. I looked back at the creature, its mouth opening wide, showing its gleaming teeth. It was too much. The darkness closed in, swallowing everything, and just as the creature lunged toward me, I closed my eyes, and then I was falling. I could feel myself falling into nothingness, the air around me growing colder with every passing second. The darkness was absolute, swallowing me whole. My mind raced, panic surging through me as I tumbled through the void. My body felt weightless, as though I was caught between this world and something far worse, something that should not exist. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat, pounding in my ears, faster and faster. The whispers, distant at first, began to return. They were no longer soft and eerie, but frantic, almost pleading. They surrounded me like a swarm of insects, crawling into my thoughts, urging me to listen. It's not too late. You can still stop it. Turn back now. I opened my eyes, hoping to break free from the suffocating darkness, but all I saw was the swirling void around me, pulling me deeper and deeper. I couldn't even tell if I was falling or standing still. Everything was distorted, spinning, and shifting. Then, suddenly, the fall stopped. I landed with a thud, a harsh, jarring impact that sent a shock through my body. I gasped for air, my lungs burning, but the air was thin, frigid, almost suffocating. I slowly pushed myself up from the cold ground, my body aching, my legs trembling. I was no longer in the shack. I was somewhere else, somewhere far worse. The world around me was a twisted, desolate landscape. The sky was a sickly, unnatural shade of gray, the sun hidden behind a veil of thick clouds that flickered with strange, erratic lightning. The trees here were even more distorted than those in the woods, their bark blackened, their branches contorted in unnatural shapes. The ground beneath me was cracked and dry, as though it had been scorched by something ancient, something evil. But the worst part, no, the most terrifying part, was the silence. The oppressive, unbearable silence. There were no sounds of birds, no rustling of leaves in the wind. The world felt dead. I staggered to my feet, my mind racing. Was this Hollow Creek? Or had I been pulled into some other realm? The whispers were louder now, but they weren't coming from the trees or the ground. They were coming from inside my own head. 1,000 voices, all speaking at once, filling my mind with fragmented thoughts, strange warnings, and cryptic messages. She's coming for you. You can't hide from her. Run before it's too late. Before I could make sense of it all, I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was nothing there. No figure, no shape, just the same desolate landscape stretching endlessly in every direction. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was watching me. It was as if the land itself was alive, aware of my every movement. And then I heard it. The low, guttural growl, the one I had heard before, from the creature in the shack. It echoed through the air, louder now, closer. And this time, I could feel its presence. I could feel the ground tremble beneath me as it drew near. I didn't want to turn around. I knew that whatever was behind me wasn't something I could face. But I had no choice. The air grew colder, and the growl became a snarl, a deep, menacing sound that rattled my bones. I turned, my breath caught in my throat, and I saw her. It was a woman. No, not a woman. She was something far worse. Her face was gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her bones, pale as death. Her eyes were hollow, black as midnight, and her lips were twisted into a cruel, jagged grin. Her hair was wild, tangled, and matted with dark, clotted strands hands that seemed to float around her head like wisps of smoke. She was tall, impossibly tall, and her body seemed to be made of shadow, her form flickering and shifting with every movement. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice hollow and echoing as if it came from the very earth itself. Her words sent a wave of icy terror crashing through me, paralyzing me in place. I tried to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. My legs felt like they were made of stone, my chest heavy with the weight of fear. The woman, no, the thing, took a step toward me, her long fingers outstretched, her smile widening. I could feel her presence, suffocating, overwhelming. She was the darkness. She was Hollow Creek. "You're mine now," she whispered again, her voice sending a chill down my spine. The ground beneath me trembled, as if acknowledging her words, as if the very land itself was bound to her will. I tried to move, to escape, but I couldn't. The air was thick with an unearthly pressure, and every step I took felt like I was wading through molasses. The woman took another step toward me, her eyes never leaving mine. She raised her hand, and I felt a sudden jolt of cold, sharp and biting, seep into my bones. "You're already part of us," she whispered, her voice like 1,000 voices, layered over each other. "You belong to Hollow Creek now." I felt the darkness closing in, swallowing me whole, the air growing colder and colder until I could barely breathe. The woman was standing in front of me now, her fingers brushing my cheek, and I could feel the sharpness of her touch, as though it were cutting into my very soul. And then, as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The woman vanished, leaving me standing alone in the desolate landscape. The growl of the creature was gone, the oppressive silence returning. I was standing in the middle of Hollow Creek again, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. But there was no time to reflect. The whispers were back, louder than ever before, echoing through my mind, urging me to run, to escape, to find a way out. But there was no escape. The silence was deafening. I stood there, in the heart of Hollow Creek, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The woman, the thing, was gone, but the air still crackled with the remnants of her presence. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together the nightmare I had just witnessed. But every time I tried, the pieces slipped through my fingers like sand in an hourglass, endlessly shifting. The whispers were no longer just voices in my head. They were all around me, filling the very air. Faint at first, like a low hum, but growing stronger with every passing second until they seemed to echo off the ground beneath me. I couldn't make out the words, only the sound, the desperate, frantic tone that seemed to scream for release. "Get out," the whispers urged. I took a shaky step forward, but the ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, pulling me in every direction. The trees were no longer just twisted figures in the distance. They had become sentient, their gnarled branches reaching toward me, as if they were trying to drag me into their dark embrace. I could hear them now, too, whispers that were almost human, like the sound of footsteps on the leaves. The darkness was closing in, and the land itself felt like it was alive, alive with malice, hungry for the souls of those who dared to enter Hollow Creek. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't give in to the darkness. I forced my legs to move, pushing forward, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Every step felt like I was wading through thick mud, the ground beneath me pulling me down, dragging me closer to the heart of the curse. The trees bent inward, their faces watching me, their eyes following my every movement. "Leave." The voices were growing louder now, urgent, pleading. "You have to leave before she comes back." "Who were they? What was this place? I needed answers, but the more I searched for them, the more lost I became. The fog had returned, rolling in like a thick blanket, obscuring everything in its path. I could barely see the path in front of me, the trees fading into the mist. But there was something else in the fog. Something moving. I stopped, my heart racing in my chest. The mist swirled around me, thick and suffocating. And then I saw it, faint at first, like a shadow in the mist, but growing clearer with every passing second. A figure. A man, tall and thin, his face obscured by the fog, his movements slow and deliberate. It was him, the man from the mill, the one who had warned me. The one who had said I could never leave. His black eyes were glowing in the mist, and I could feel his presence before he even spoke. You can't escape, you know. His voice was low, rasping, like the sound of dry leaves scraping against stone. You belong to Hollow Creek. I stepped back, fear rising in my chest. The fog seemed to swirl around him like a cloud, his form shifting and flickering like an illusion. No, I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't belong here. I can't be part of this. You already are, he hissed, his form suddenly lunging toward me, his face twisting into a grotesque smile. His teeth were sharp, jagged, too many to count, and his eyes, those black, endless eyes, were filled with a cruel, mocking hunger. The air grew colder as he stepped closer, and I felt the weight of his presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. My body was frozen, my mind blank, and all I could hear were the whispers, growing louder, drowning out everything else. The trees around me seemed to close in, their faces contorting with dark delight. The man's voice rang in my ears, louder now, as if it was coming from every direction. You can't run. You can't hide. You're already ours. My chest tightened, and my breathing became shallow. I felt the fog choking me, the whispers clawing at my mind, trying to drag me deeper into the curse. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. The fear, the darkness, it was all too much. But then, something shifted. A distant cry, soft at first, echoed through the mist. It sounded like a woman's voice, calling my name. I turned, straining to hear, desperate for any sign of hope, any sign that there was something beyond this nightmare. The cry grew louder, more desperate. Help me. I ran toward it, my legs moving faster now, the fog parting before me like a veil. The trees seemed to recede, their faces fading into the distance. The whispers, the growls, the laughter, they all fell away as I sprinted toward the voice, toward whatever was calling me. The mist thinned, and I stumbled into a clearing. The fog had lifted, and there, standing in the center, was a figure, someone I recognized. It was a woman, her face familiar, yet I couldn't place her. She was standing alone in the clearing, her long hair blowing in the wind. She was pale, her eyes hollow, just like the woman in the shack. But this time, there was something different about her. Her lips were moving, but no sound came from them. It was as if she was trapped in a silent scream. No, I whispered, a cold chill running down my spine. No, it can't be you. But she turned to face me, her eyes meeting mine. And then I saw it, the truth. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Her eyes, they were mine. I stood frozen, the world around me falling away. This woman, this creature, was not just some lost soul. She was me. She was what I was meant to become. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. And then, the fog closed and once again, I couldn't breathe. I stood frozen in the clearing, staring at the woman, the creature whose eyes mirrored my own. The realization crashed over me like a wave. It wasn't just a hallucination, a nightmare. This was real. This was me. The cursed land had twisted me, turned me into something else, something dark, something that belonged to Hollow Creek. The figure before me, the woman whose hollow, lifeless eyes stared back at me, was my future. It was what awaited me if I didn't escape. The darkness that consumed Hollow Creek was taking me, piece by piece, until nothing remained but an empty shell, a soulless specter doomed to wander the cursed land forever. I could feel the fog closing in again, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just the mist, it was the curse, pulling me deeper into its grasp. I wanted to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. The fog wrapped around me, and the whispering grew louder, more frantic, like the voices of 1,000 souls begging for release. Help me, I heard the voices cry out, their tones desperate, pleading. But it was too late. There was no escape. I could feel the presence of the land pressing in on me, suffocating me. Hollow Creek was alive, and it had claimed me. But then, something shifted. A flicker of defiance stirred inside me. I wasn't just going to give in. Not yet. I shook my head, trying to break free from the pull of the fog, from the oppressive weight of the curse. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I could do. I wasn't going to become like her, like that hollow version of myself standing before me. I took a step forward, then another, my feet feeling heavy but determined. The fog parted before me, like a barrier being pushed aside. The woman's eyes followed me, but she didn't move. She stood there, her hollow gaze boring into me, as if she were already resigned to her fate. But I wasn't going to be like her. I couldn't. I had to find the heart of this place, the source of the curse. The mill. It had to be the key. The whispers had always led me there. The warnings, the voices, they had all come from the mill. The path through the forest was clearer now, though the fog clung to the ground, swirling around my ankles. The trees still watched me, their twisted faces following every movement, but I kept my eyes focused ahead. The ground beneath me was soft, wet, as though the earth itself was saturated with something ancient, something dark. With each step, the whispers became more distant, but the weight in my chest didn't lessen. The closer I got to the mill, the more I could feel the curse tightening its grip around me. My heartbeat quickened, and I forced myself to push forward, ignoring the cold sweat that clung to my skin. Finally, I reached the edge of the clearing where the mill stood, its silhouette dark against the pale sky. The broken windows stared back at me, empty and lifeless. The mill had been abandoned for years, but there was no mistaking it. The curse had its roots here, and if I was going to break free, this was where I had to confront it. I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and decay. The silence inside was oppressive, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I moved deeper into the mill, the shadows shifting around me. And then I saw it. At the far end of the room, hidden in the shadows, was an old, rusted well. The same well I had seen in the vision, the one that had called to me in my dreams. It was deep, impossibly deep, and I could feel the pull of it, as if something was waiting for me at the bottom. The whispers were louder now, urgent. Don't look into it. Don't fall in. But I had no choice. I had to know. I had to end this. I stepped closer to the well, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. The air grew colder with each step, and I could feel the darkness closing in. I reached the edge of the well and peered down. The blackness seemed to stretch endlessly, a void that swallowed all light. And then I saw it, a faint glow at the bottom, a dim light that flickered like a dying flame. It wasn't just a light. It was her. The woman, the creature who had shown me what I was meant to become. She was standing at the bottom of the well, her face twisted in agony, her eyes empty and hollow, just like the version of me I had seen before. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I gasped, stepping back from the edge, my heart racing. The woman's face, it was me. It was the future that awaited me. She was trapped, bound to the well, to the curse. And I knew then that this was where it all began, the source of the evil that had claimed this place. But there was something else, a presence in the well, something darker, something far older than the woman. I could feel it now, swirling in the depths, watching me. "Help me," the voice came again, this time stronger, more insistent. I reached out, my hand trembling, and before I could stop myself, I leaned over the edge, my eyes fixed on the figure below. And then, the darkness moved. The force of it was like a tidal wave, crashing against me. A cold, suffocating darkness that reached out, grabbing hold of my soul. The well was not just a trap, it was a gateway, a doorway into something far worse. The curse that had bound Hollow Creek for centuries had been waiting for someone to come, to look into the well, to give it a soul to claim. I tried to pull back, but the darkness was too strong. It wrapped around me, pulling me down, dragging me into the depths of the well. The last thing I saw before I was swallowed by the void was the woman's face, my face, twisted in terror, as if she knew what was coming next. And then, nothing. I don't know how long I was in the darkness. Time had no meaning anymore, no boundaries. The void seemed endless, a black expanse that stretched out in all directions. I couldn't feel the ground beneath me, couldn't hear anything except the faint, constant whispering that echoed through the void. It was a soft hum at first, like the sound of wind rustling through trees, but it grew louder, more urgent, until it felt like my very soul was vibrating with the voices. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though the darkness itself was pressing down on me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, suspended in this endless abyss, with nothing but the whispers to keep me company. "You can't escape," they whispered. "You belong to us now." I tried to move, to break free from the grip of the darkness, but it was like swimming through tar, my limbs heavy and unresponsive. I couldn't see anything. There were no shapes, no figures, no walls. Just the suffocating blackness that wrapped itself around me like a shroud. And then I felt it. A presence, something moving in the darkness with me. It was cold, its touch like ice against my skin. I tried to pull away, but the presence was everywhere, pressing against me, curling around me like tendrils of shadow. It whispered in my ear, its voice a low, guttural rasp, like the sound of chains dragging across the floor. "You thought you could escape," it murmured, its voice familiar, but twisted. "But you're already ours. You belong to the well. You belong to Hollow Creek." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but my body wouldn't move. The whispers were growing louder, the pressure on my chest tightening with each passing second. It felt like the very air was crushing me, and I could feel my thoughts slipping away, like sand through my fingers. And then, just as I thought I would lose myself completely, there was a sudden jolt, like a snap, and the darkness shattered. I fell. For a moment, there was nothing but falling through an endless void, through an ocean of blackness. But then, there was light. Faint at first, a soft glow in the distance, but it grew brighter, clearer, until I was surrounded by it. The light was warm, almost inviting, like the first rays of dawn after a long, dark night. I landed hard, but instead of the cold ground, I felt a softness beneath me, soft grass, damp and cold to the touch. I opened my eyes, blinking against the brightness, and slowly sat up. I was no longer in the well, no longer in the suffocating darkness. I was outside, but not in Owl Creek, not in the forest. I was in a field. The sky above was a soft blue, the sun shining brightly. The air was fresh, clean, the smell of grass and flowers filling my lungs. The world was peaceful, calm, too calm. It was everything that Owl Creek wasn't. It felt wrong. I stood up, confused, disoriented, but a sense of hope surged through me. Maybe I had escaped. Maybe this was a dream or some kind of illusion. But the feel of the grass beneath my feet was too real. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. There was a path in the distance, leading toward a small, dilapidated cottage. It looked so out of place here, in this perfect world. But before I could move, I heard it, the soft rustling of leaves behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone, but there was nothing. The field was empty, except for the whisper. It was soft at first, just like before, but it was there, in the air, around me, like a breath on the back of my neck. The voice was familiar, low and gentle. You can never leave Owl Creek. The words chilled me to my core. The voice, the same voice I had heard in the darkness, in the mill, in the well, it was here, too. It was still with me. And then I realized the truth. I had never left. The field was an illusion, a trap. The whispers, the strange sense of peace, it was all part of Owl Creek. The curse wasn't just a place, it was a state of being. The land, the mill, the well, they were just the surface. The true curse was something far deeper, something that seeped into the very fabric of reality. I spun around, my heart racing, and there, in the distance, I saw it. The mill. The familiar silhouette, standing just at the edge of the field, surrounded by a thick, rolling mist. It hadn't disappeared. It was always there, waiting for me to find it again. The fog swirled around me, thick and suffocating, and I knew then that the curse had claimed me once more. I was trapped. Again. But this time, I wasn't just lost in the woods. This time, the curse had followed me. It was inside me, part of me. It whispered in my mind, a constant, insidious presence. You belong to Owl Creek. I wanted to fight it. I wanted to scream. But the fog was closing in, the mill growing larger in my vision, its twisted, decaying form reaching toward me like a monster with 1,000 arms. I ran. I ran through the field, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my legs burning. But the field wouldn't end. The path wouldn't end. It stretched on, forever, as if the land itself was mocking me. I turned. I looked back, but the mill was still there, looming, place in the distance, no matter how fast I ran. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, surrounding me, drowning me in their voices. You can never leave. You are one of us. Forever. I screamed. I cried out. But the field never ended. The mill was always there, waiting. And as I fell to my knees, the whispers consumed me, and I realized the truth. There was no escape. There never had been. Hollow Creek wasn't just a place, it was a prison for the soul, a curse that would last for eternity. And I had become part of it. The whispers were deafening now. They filled every corner of my mind, drowning out my thoughts, my memories, my very identity. I could no longer tell where I ended and the curse began. Hollow Creek had consumed me, body, soul, and spirit. The mill, the fog, the twisted trees, they were no longer separate from me. They had become part of me, just as I had become part of them. I fell to my knees, my hands trembling, my body weak from the weight of the curse. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse with a life of its own, alive with the dark energy that had always existed here. It wasn't just the mill that held me. It wasn't just the fog, or the trees, or the whispers. It was the land itself. Hollow Creek was alive. The mist swirled around me, and I could hear the woman's voice again, the voice that had once been mine. She was everywhere now, her words blending with the other voices that whispered their torments in my ears. You can never leave. You are ours. I wanted to scream, to fight back, but it was pointless. The words felt true. The realization sank deep into my bones, and I understood, in the most profound way, that I had been chosen. Chosen by the land, chosen by the curse, to become one with it. There was no escaping it. There never had been. The fog thickened, and the mill loomed closer, its silhouette cutting through the mist. I could see the faint glow of the lantern in its window, flickering like a dying ember. I wanted to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body had grown too weak, too exhausted from the endless struggle. And then I saw her. The woman, my reflection, my future, was standing in the doorway of the mill, her eyes hollow and black, her smile twisted. She was waiting for me, beckoning me to come closer. I knew what she was. I knew what I was meant to become. The whispers grew softer, almost soothing, as I crawled toward the mill. It wasn't a walk anymore. It wasn't a choice. My body moved on its own, drawn by the pull of the curse. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be consumed. But it was too late. Hollow Creek had already taken me, and I could feel it, a dark, suffocating presence closing in around me. The door to the mill creaked open as I approached. I stepped inside, and the temperature dropped, the cold biting into my skin, sinking deep into my bones. The shadows shifted around me, swirling like tendrils of smoke. The lantern flickered in the corner, its light casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Welcome home," the woman whispered. I looked up at her, my heart pounding in my chest. She reached out a hand to me, her fingers pale and cold as ice. And then I saw it. Her hand was my hand. Her face was my face. Her eyes were mine, empty and hollow. "We are the same," she said, her voice echoing in the stillness. "You are part of the land now. You are part of the curse. We are all bound together." I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream, to break free. but the darkness had already taken root inside me. I could feel it crawling beneath my skin, filling every part of me. There was no resistance left. The land, the mill, the curse, it was all one. And I had become one with it. I stood in front of her, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. I had entered Hollow Creek as a wanderer, a lost soul looking for something. But now, I was part of it, as much a part of this cursed place as the twisted trees, the decaying mill, and the endless fog. I was no one. I was nothing. The darkness surged within me, and I closed my eyes, embracing the inevitable. I had been lost from the moment I first set foot in Hollow Creek. The curse had claimed me, and now I was one with it. And then there was nothing. The curse of Hollow Creek is complete. The protagonist has become an eternal part of the land, joining the countless lost souls who have wandered too far and been consumed by the darkness. The story ends as they are absorbed into the curse, never to escape. Thank you for listening to today's story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Horror Echo. Let us know if you've ever had a similar experience. We'd love to hear your story. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.